Hi, it's Jim Dodds, and most people know me as the Florida Bike Guy. You know, when we get called by someone who's been involved in a bike crash, sometimes the evidence of who was at fault is very clear-cut. The driver gets cited, the cyclist didn't do anything wrong, and there's no argument that they did. Those cases are in a separate category. What I want to talk to you about today are some cases where the cyclist was told it was their fault, or the police gave them a citation, or they put that it was their fault in the police report. What I'd like you to take away from this presentation is an understanding that even if that happens, you should still talk to someone who's knowledgeable about a bike accident, because it doesn't necessarily mean that you can't bring a claim. I want to run through a couple of cases that we've investigated where they said the cyclist did something wrong. I'll explain kind of what we did, what we looked at it, and how we got it turned around completely and settled the case, in most cases for the policy limits available from the driver. All right, this is a situation involving a cyclist who was riding on a 2-lane in each direction road. He was riding on the right-hand side. This is someone that followed the same path multiple times a week. He knew exactly what direction he was going and where he was coming. A driver coming from the opposite direction, when they got to an intersection, made a left-hand turn as the cyclist was going through the intersection. The cyclist contended that he was struck on his left side by the driver, and he received serious injuries which required surgery. What happened is, in this case, there was a child on the corner who told the police that the cyclist was coming from the opposite direction, in other words, the same direction as the car was driving, on the side of the road where the accident happened. So the police officer contended my client was on the sidewalk, drove off the sidewalk into the path of the turning car, which would have placed the contact of the vehicle on his right side, knocking him to his left. Okay? The investigative photographs by the police officer indicated that there was significant damage to the bicycle, but it was on the left-hand side. The left front fork is bent and the frame is cracked as well on the left side of the frame. If you look at the vehicle that was involved in the crash, there was damage on the passenger side. So this vehicle damage was all on the right front, and the lower right quadrant, and across the part of the hood on the right side. So the issue that we faced at the time that we were involved in the case is that the driver said he was going northbound and was hit by a turning driver on his left side. The police report indicated the cyclist was driving on the sidewalk from the opposite direction. The insurance company took the position it was not their fault that my client had ridden into the path of the car. When you looked at all of the factors together, with his left-sided injuries, the left-sided bicycle frame damage, the right-sided injury or damage to the vehicle, which is consistent with her turning to the left and him striking her coming from her right. There was also bloodstains on the road. There was the position where the cyclist was found, and some of his gear was found on the road. All of it was entirely consistent with my client being correct that he was driving northbound, was hit as he hit the intersection by a left-turning car on his left side. The result of all of that, after we got involved in the case, was that the defense paid their policy limits, which were substantial in this case. The next case is one involving a cyclist who was a very experienced cyclist riding on a 2-lane road. This was on a beach community. There was a single lane in each direction with a designated bike lane. Cyclist is riding along almost at the speed of traffic. As the cyclist gets to a side street, the car on their immediate left makes a right hook, striking him as he's going into the intersection. The initial position by the insurance company was that their insured indicated he never saw our client. Our client was passing the vehicle on the right, and therefore the insurance took the position that my client had 80% of the responsibility for the crash. He had a $9,000 property damage claim for his bicycle alone, and they were offering him about 20% of the value of the bicycle. The result of our investigation, and when I pointed out the law to them that he had the right to be in that lane, the right to be proceeding at that place, and that the right-of-way was with him, the insurance company rescinded their position and paid the policy limits to my client. This next case is kind of an interesting case because there was no contact between the vehicle and my client. At the same time, the police said that the driver had done nothing wrong and there was no contact. So my client's an experienced driver, cyclist. He's in his 80s. I love 80-year-old cyclist. He's proceeding on a 2-lane road, 1 lane in each direction. He approaches the exit for a condominium. What happened is that the driver of the vehicle was proceeding out of the condominium, came to a stop immediately before getting into the street. In other words, she comes to the street, edge of the street, slams on the brakes. My client is coming along. Just as she approaches, he swerves to the left. He falls off because he thought he'd been hit. She was close enough that she frightened him, knocked him off his bike. The driver took the position, I never touched him, I didn't do anything wrong, and that was bolstered by a witness who was following the driver who basically said the same thing. The argument by the claims adjuster to me was that they made no contact, the driver did nothing wrong, and that my client simply fell off his bike because he's an older guy. Those arguments really incense me. There is strong case law in Florida that if a driver sets up a zone of danger and my client is within that zone of danger and is injured because of the proximity of the client to the person who caused the issue, liability rests upon them. So even though this driver didn't make contact, if she came close enough to frighten him or cause him to fall, the liability still goes to the driver of the vehicle. As a result of the argument that we made and the demand we made, the insurance company paid the policy limits in that case as well. I want to mention one last case, which points up another interesting problem, and that is the police kind of just really making a mess of doing the investigation. This case is still pending, so it's an unfinished case, but the issue in terms of liability has pretty much been resolved in terms of people accepting responsibility. This involves a roundabout, and this is a 2-lane roundabout. A lot of people get confused about roundabouts. The driver in this particular situation entered the roundabout in the left lane as she came there. The law in Florida is that when a driver enters a roundabout in the left lane, they cannot exit at the first right out turn. They have to go at least to the second. The client was a cyclist on a bike coming into the roundabout on the right-hand side, as they're required to do, single file in a line of cyclists. The driver goes past them, enters using the left-hand lane, and when she got to the first turnout, she turned across to the cyclist, causing a pretty significant injury. When the police arrived at the scene, it's one of these situations I've found repeatedly that many times police officers arrive at the scene of a bike crash, and their impression is the cyclist has done something wrong, let me find what that evidence is, and my investigation is over. So the police report indicates that the cyclist was traveling with a group of bicyclists who possibly was not riding in a single file. So he did not have evidence that they weren't riding in a single file, which they were, but he just said they possibly weren't riding in a single file, and what difference that would have made in this crash is unclear to me or anyone else, I think. And they cited, one of the contributing factors in the police report was that the cyclist, quote, failed to yield the right-of-way. It's interesting that going into that roundabout intersection is a sign that's posted at every roundabout in this development that shows that if you look at that sign, the driver entering on the left-hand lane cannot make the first right turn. They've got to go to the second right turn. So the officer basically got the law wrong. It's really clear that the driver was totally at fault here. The driver can't make the right turn that the driver made. Even though we had a police report finding my client failed to yield the right-of-way and failing to find that the defendant driver had done anything wrong, the liability insurer for the driver had accepted responsibility for the crash when we pointed out exactly what the law is and what the people are required to do when operating in a 2-lane roundabout. I think the takeaway is that if you ever or know somebody that's been involved in a bike crash, it really doesn't matter what the facts are. Even if they say the bicyclist did something wrong, I would always urge you to call an experienced bike lawyer to talk about it. I've just pointed out some. I have other cases I could talk about that similar situations have occurred. These cases are kind of driven by the facts, and the more serious the injury is, the more at stake there is, and the less likely sometimes an insurance company is willing to roll the dice, so to speak, on liability if they know they're going to lose big if they lose that argument. I've got material that is available to you when you sign up for our newsletter, get our phone case and sign up for the newsletter. I'll send you information on 8 steps to take after a cycling crash. I could tell you now, but the thing is you need to have it with you at the time that it happens. This stuff comes as a card within the phone case. It tells you what to do. You can carry it with you all the time while you're on your bike. The one thing that I would do after a cycling crash is be careful who you talk to. Make sure you gather evidence, take photographs. When you start receiving phone calls from insurance companies, you definitely might want to talk to a lawyer before you start making statements to an insurance company. And I'll explain to you at the appropriate time why that's true. If I can ever be of help to you, answer a question, satisfy any concern of yours related to a cycling injury or cycling insurance, just call our office. There's never a charge to talk to someone about a cycling crash or any other injury case for that matter. We only get paid a fee if we represent someone and settle their case, and we're paid a percentage of that settlement. So there's never any hourly fees for talking to anybody. I always put it this way: if we represent you, you'll either get a check, you'll never write a check. If I can ever help you in any way, let me know. I hope this was interesting. I look forward to seeing you on the road.